In 2008, a room full of Wall Street executives sat before Congress and swore they had no idea the financial crisis was coming. But if you watch the footage, their bodies told a different story. Psychologists who study deception say there are specific, measurable tells that appear when someone lies about money. And once you know what to look for, you can't unsee them. Here's something most people get wrong about lie detection. They think liars fidget, avoid eye contact, and touch their face constantly. That's what TV shows taught us. But the science says the opposite is often true. When humans lie, especially about high-stakes topics like money, our limbic system kicks into an ancient survival mode called the freeze-flight-fight response. Before we run or attack, we freeze. We become unnaturally still. It's a hardwired reaction left over from when staying motionless helped us avoid predators. Your rational brain knows you need to act normal, but your primitive brain is screaming danger. The result? Microfreezes, stiff posture, reduced hand gestures. Former FBI agent and body language expert Joe Navarro spent decades interviewing suspects. He documented this pattern in his book What Everybody Is Saying. When people lie about financial crimes, fraud, or money they've stolen, they often exhibit what he calls the board effect. They become stiff as a board. Their limbic system is trying to make them invisible. Picture this scenario. Someone's pitching you an investment opportunity. You're talking about guaranteed returns, inside information, ground floor opportunities. Now watch their hands. Are they gesturing naturally, the way people do when they're genuinely excited about something? Or are their hands locked at their sides, pressed together, or gripping the table? That physical restriction isn't confidence, it's containment. The freeze response shows up in other subtle ways too. Decreased blinking, shallow breathing, a sudden reduction in those tiny head movements we make during normal conversations in the wakes. It's as if the person is bracing for impact. Because in a very real sense, they aren't. Their nervous system knows they're in dangerous territory, even if their words sound perfectly confident. But here's what makes this complicated. Nervousness and deception can look similar. An honest person in a stressful situation might also freeze up. That's why body language alone is never proof of lying. What matters is the baseline. How does this person normally move and gesture? And what happens when the conversation specifically shifts to money? That's where the tells appear. Let's look at a real case where body language told the story before the evidence did. Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos in 2003, claiming her company could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. By 2014, the company was valued at $9 billion. Holmes became the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. Except the technology didn't work. The whole thing was smoke and mirrors. When investigative reporter John Kerry Sepperu started asking questions in 2015, Holmes went on a media offensive. She appeared on CNBC, Bloomberg, and stage at conferences. And body language analysts noticed something striking. During softball questions about her vision and inspiration, Holmes was animated. Hand gestures, facial expressions, natural movement. But when asked specific questions about the technology, about validation studies, about how the tests actually worked, her body changed. Her blink rate dropped dramatically. Her hands, which moments before had been moving expressively, suddenly locked together or disappeared below the table. Her head movements became minimal. Analysts noted she exhibited what's called turtling, where the shoulders rise slightly and the neck shortens, a protective posture. Most tellingly, her illustrator gestures, those hand movements that normally accompany speech and emphasize points, vanished completely during technical questions. In her 2017 deposition, obtained later by investigators, you can watch this pattern intensify. When her lawyer asks basic background questions, Holmes shows normal nonverbal behavior. But when questions turn to specific claims she made to investors about partnerships with Pfizer and the Department of Defense, partnerships that turned out to be fabricated, her body language shifts within seconds. Her voice stays steady. Her face remains composed. But her hands grip each other. Her posture becomes rigid. The freeze response in action. Here's the specific moment that body language experts point to. When asked whether she knew certain test results shown to investors were actually produced by commercial analyzers, not Theranos devices, Holmes paused for 7 full seconds. During that pause, she didn't move. Not a hand gesture, not a head tilt, nothing. Just absolute stillness while her brain worked to construct an answer. That's not thoughtful consideration. That's cognitive overload.
Lying requires significantly more mental effort than telling the truth, and that effort shows in the body. Holmes was convicted of fraud in January 2022. The evidence was financial documents, testimony, and emails, but the body language was a preview, visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Her nervous system was broadcasting the truth, even as her words constructed fiction.
So what's actually happening in the brain when someone lies about money? Psychologists call it non-verbal leakage. Your conscious mind can control your words, but your autonomic nervous system is much harder to fake. Researchers Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen spent decades studying this at the University of California. They discovered that facial expressions of emotion last between half a second and 4 seconds when genuine. But when someone is manufacturing an expression, simulating confidence they don't feel, or enthusiasm about a fake investment, the timing is off. The smile appears too quickly, or lingers too long. What Ekman called micro-expressions, flashes of true emotion lasting less than a quarter second, leak through before the person can suppress them. Fear, contempt, anxiety. They appear and vanish so fast, most people miss them entirely.
But here's what makes financial deception especially revealing.
When people lie about facts, about where they were or what they did, they can sometimes maintain composure. But when they lie about money, especially large sums or fraudulent schemes, the emotional stakes are higher. Their stress response is more intense. And that intensity shows in what body language experts call adapters. Adapters are self-soothing behaviors: touching the neck, rubbing the hands together, adjusting clothing repeatedly, covering the suprasternal notch, that little dip at the base of the throat, which Navarro identifies as one of the most reliable stress indicators. When someone's lying about money, you'll often see a sudden increase in these adapters right when the conversation hits the deception. It's like their body is trying to comfort itself through a threatening situation. A study published in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior analyzed courtroom testimony in fraud cases. Researchers found that defendants showed significantly more hand-to-face contact and object manipulation, fidgeting with pens or paper, during questions about financial transactions compared to neutral biographical questions. The difference was measurable and consistent across cases. But the most reliable cluster of behaviors involves what researchers call distance regulation. When someone's uncomfortable with what they're saying, they unconsciously try to create distance from it. Leaning back from the table, turning their torso away while their head faces forward. Placing objects, a laptop, a folder, between themselves and the questioner. One study of investor pitch meetings found that entrepreneurs who later turned out to be misrepresenting their financials showed significantly more distancing behavior during questions about revenue and projections. The key insight from this research?
No single behavior means deception,
But clusters of behaviors, changes from baseline, and specific triggers around money topics create a pattern. And that pattern is what trained observers learn to recognize. Now here's where this gets really interesting. What happens when the liars know what you're looking for? Some of history's most successful con artists have been students of body language, consciously controlling their nonverbal behavior to appear more trustworthy. Consider the case of Bernie Madoff, who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history, defrauding investors of approximately $65 billion over at least 17 years. People who met with Madoff described him as unusually calm, self-assured, and convincing. He didn't exhibit obvious nervous tells. Why? Because he'd been lying successfully for so long that his body had adapted. The cognitive load of deception decreased with practice. Psychologist Bella DiPaolo studied this phenomenon at the University of Virginia. She found that practiced liars, people who deceive regularly, show fewer behavioral indicators than occasional liars. Their bodies become accustomed to the act. But even Madoff wasn't perfect. In video footage from interviews during the 1990s, analysts noted his unusual eye contact pattern. Instead of the natural breaks and shifts of genuine conversation, Madoff maintained intense, unbroken eye contact, especially when making claims about returns. This wasn't natural confidence. It was performed confidence, overcompensating for the cultural belief that liars avoid eye contact. Robert Cialdini, in his book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, explains how skilled persuaders and con artists exploit our unconscious trust signals. They learn to mirror body language, creating false rapport.
They practice open palm gestures, which signal honesty, They control their blink rate and breathing, but Cialdini also notes that this performance requires constant mental effort. And under stress, under unexpected questions or challenges, the mask slips. There's a famous moment in a 2007 interview where a journalist asked Madoff an unscripted question about his trading strategy. For just a few seconds, you can see the composure crack. His hand moves to his neck. His shoulder rises slightly. His answer becomes evasive, filled with jargon. Then he recovers, and the smooth performance resumes. But that micro moment of stress leaked through. The counterintuitive lesson? Sometimes the most dangerous financial liars are the ones who seem too controlled, too perfect in their presentation. Natural human conversation involves imperfections, fidgets, asymmetries. When someone pitching you an investment or financial opportunity seems unnaturally smooth, that polish itself can be a red flag. They've rehearsed this performance because they know it's not true. This is why professional interrogators and fraud investigators don't just look for nervousness, they look for incongruence. Does the body language match the content and context? Does the person's affect, their emotional display, fit what they're describing? Someone genuinely excited about a breakthrough innovation shows spontaneous enthusiasm. Someone faking it shows performed enthusiasm. And your intuition, that gut feeling, often picks up on the difference, even before your conscious mind does. So what do you do with this information? Here's the practical reality. You're not an FBI interrogator. You don't have hours of baseline observation or deposition footage to analyze. But you can still protect yourself from financial deception by understanding these principles. Think of body language not as a lie detector, but as a reason to ask better questions. First, establish a baseline early in any financial conversation. Whether it's a sales pitch, an investment opportunity, or a negotiation, notice how the person moves and speaks during neutral topics. How animated are they? What's their normal gesture rate? Do they make steady eye contact or glance away periodically? This is their baseline. Now watch what happens when the conversation shifts to the specific financial claims. Returns, guarantees, risk. If their body language changes significantly during these topics, that's your signal to slow down and probe deeper. Second, ask unexpected questions. Rehearsed lies come with rehearsed body language, but unexpected questions force cognitive load, and that's when nonverbal leakage increases. If someone's pitching you an investment, don't just ask the questions they're prepared for. Ask about specific mechanisms, about worst-case scenarios, about the details they glossed over. Watch not just what they say, but how their body responds to being pushed off script. Third, trust clusters, not single behaviors. Someone touching their face once means nothing, but someone who suddenly starts displaying multiple stress indicators, neck touching, decreased gestures, distancing, increased blink rate, all during questions about money, that's a pattern worth noting. As Morgan Housel writes in The Psychology of Money, financial decisions are rarely about spreadsheets and math. They're about people, stories, and trust. And body language is part of how we assess trust, even unconsciously. Fourth, remember that context matters enormously. Someone might freeze up during financial discussions because they're nervous, inexperienced, or uncomfortable with confrontation, not because they're lying. This is especially important to remember in your own behavior. If you're honest but anxious, you might exhibit the same behaviors as a liar. The solution isn't to fake confidence, it's to be transparent about your nervousness. I'm not great at pitching, but let me show you the actual data. Honesty about discomfort is itself a trust signal. Finally, use body language as one input among many. Never make a financial decision based on someone's nonverbal behavior alone, but if someone's words say, guaranteed returns, while their body screams stress and discomfort, that's your cue to do more research. Check references. Verify claims independently. Ask for documentation. The body language doesn't prove they're lying, but it tells you where to look more carefully. Remember that opening example? Those Wall Street executives swearing they didn't see the crisis coming? Body language couldn't have prevented the 2008 collapse, but it could have told you something was deeply wrong if you knew what to look for. That freeze response, those micro-expressions of contempt, the incongruence between their words and their nonverbal signals. Your nervous system picks up on these things. The question is whether you listen to it or talk yourself out of what you're sensing.
In financial decisions, that instinct might be the most valuable asset you have. If this changed how you'll watch people talk about money, subscribe for more psychology that protects your wallet. Next up, we're breaking down the anchoring effect and why you always overpay for the first option. See you there.